I want to welcome all of you that are watching us online and those of you that are here in the room. We're in week 6 on the book of Daniel. We're going to be studying chapter 7. I am so looking forward to this passage and yet terrified at the same time. Dear Heavenly Father, I pray as we open up your words that you would give me the clarity to be able to speak your words and the ability to get out of the way. God, I thank you for the privilege of Daniel chapter 7. Help me to be able to communicate it. Use me, God, in Jesus' precious and holy name. Amen. Daniel chapter 7 is one of the most quoted passages in the entire New Testament. In fact, the Apostle John builds out of it in the book of Revelation more than any other passage in the entire Bible. I'm convinced that it's one of Jesus' favorite passages. In fact, there's an image in Daniel chapter 7 that Jesus takes on and uses that as a title to describe himself over 70 times in the Gospels. I want to help us kind of understand a little bit about Daniel chapter 7 because if we catch a couple of the important things, it'll help us make sense of it. If you look at Daniel chapter 7, it's in the section of Scripture that's in the Aramaic portion of it. Chapter 2 through 7 is part of the book that's not written in Hebrew. It's written in Aramaic, which is the common language of the Gentile people. And it's really written so that we can understand some major things. We've taken a few weeks to help you understand chiasm, and I just kind of review just a little bit. If you look at Chapter 4 and chapter 5, that brings to the heart or the main point of this section of the book, and they go together. They're about pride. It's about Nebuchadnezzar's pride. It's about Belshazzar's pride. One person decided to repent, the other one didn't. If you look at chapter 3, it goes with chapter 6. It's where they're given a choice to bow down to the image or they're given a choice to bow down to the king, and both of them say no. One gets thrown into the fiery furnace, the other one gets thrown into the lion's den, but God rescues both of them. If we go back, and if we have to make sure that we catch this, that Daniel chapter 7 goes with chapter 2, and in order for us to understand chapter 7, we have to catch some of the details of chapter 2, and I'm going to take a few minutes to help us capture that. One more thing that's really important as you go through Daniel's book, there's 2 major parts. The first part is historical narrative or biography, and what it is it talks about how God interacts with people. It shows how God cares about real people and he's personally involved in their life. And when they need him, God shows up in cool, even miraculous ways. The rest of the book is about how God works behind the scenes, how God does miraculous things, but not just through people, but also through nations. This part is the most terrifying part for pastors because this is the part that is about prophecy. This is what is known as apocalyptic literature. And apocalyptic literature can be a little bit difficult to understand because it uses numbers, it uses animals, it uses symbols to help us understand some things that are really important. There's a guy, his name was Brent Sandy, and he was a theologian, and what he did is described how that apocalyptic literature grabs your attention. It like reaches out and just grabs you and forces you to pay attention to it. Here's what he says. He says, when people are nearly blind, we increase the font size. When people are nearly deaf, we turn up the volume. When people are not able to understand, we use visuals. In apocalyptic literature, God increases the font size, turns up the volume, and uses visuals all at the same time in order to grab your attention. There's something about apocalyptic literature that forces you to pay attention to it. The book of Revelation uses the same kind of genre, and it's crucial. It uses stuff like the Battle of Armageddon. It talks to us about incredibly important things. In Daniel chapter 7, there's several of them. It's the Ancient of Days. It's the Son of Man coming on the clouds, and these 4 beasts coming out of the wild, crazy sea. The other thing I want to pay attention to is apocalyptic literature is written specifically to encourage discouraged people. People that are ready to give up hope, and it uses symbols in order to help them understand it. The problem when it comes to symbols is sometimes, if we're not careful, we will get fixated on the unimportant and we'll miss what is completely obvious. I love Larry Osborne's book. In fact, if you want to read a really cool book about the book of Daniel, I would recommend this book wholeheartedly. And what he talks about is that there's something inside of us that wants to understand the symbols so much that if we're not careful, we'll get fixated on it. And while we're fixating on that, we'll miss what is absolutely important. Our world is right now places so much attention on the end of the world. In fact, I was talking to my son about all of the movies that were in the last 15 years about the end of the world, and it's just amazing to me how many movies are fixated on the end of the world. And in all of those movies, there's like a nuclear war, or there's aliens, or there's like some kind of global catastrophe, and then evil gets to the place where it wins and there's only a couple people left. Well, the Bible talks about how things are going to get really bad, but that is not the end of the story. We're going to look in Daniel chapter 7 and read this apocalyptic genre, and it is incredible how it gives us prophecy that is so accurate, people can't not even admit it was written when it was. They say there's no possible way that Daniel could have been so accurate on world kingdoms. So let's start with Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. One last thing, it's written probably about 20 years before chapter 6, so this is not chronological. This is in the first year of King Belshazzar, and he's the one that's written in chapter 5, and that's when we see the Babylonian kingdom come to an end. But it's not when it came to an end. It was in the first year when his father allowed him to rule. In the first year of Belteshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and vision passed through his mind, and he was lying in his bed. He didn't give all the details. He just wrote down the substance of what was written. Daniel said, in my vision at night, and it's interesting how he points out 3 times that this took place at night. I looked, and there before me were 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. The 4 great beasts, each different out from the others, came out of the sea. And if you look at and you understand the Old Testament, the sea is almost always a visual symbol of chaos. It's a vision when evil is starting to take over and when it's starting to rule. But the 4 great beasts, each different from the others. Why are the same 4 empires referred to as precious metals in chapter 2 in one dream and beast in another? I'm going to give you a little bit of the details of chapter 2 in a few minutes, but it's interesting to think how they're brought together so differently. The statue of Nebuchadnezzar's dream shows us the empires of the world as people see them. Beautiful, precious, highly valued, and deserving of our praise. In Daniel chapter 7, however, we see the same kingdoms as God sees them. They're given to Daniel. They're ferocious beasts bent on conquest, plunder, destruction, and domination. God sees beyond the glitter of the world and the depraved nature inside the heart of every human ruler. What's different is chapter 2 is about kingdoms, chapter 7 is about kings, and it gets right to the heart of people. God isn't fooled by mighty armies, hanging gardens, vast palaces, and sumptuous feasts. He knows the heart of man and is at the heart of a beast. It's desperately wicked and full of evil. This was written by a guy named Ray Pritchard. Now let's get back to the image. Remember, something comes out of the sea that's stirring it up, and out of that there comes 4 beasts, and we're going to get a little bit of the picture. The first was like a lion. It had wings of an eagle, and back in the Babylonian days, everyone would know it was talking about Babylon. In fact, there were lions that strode the sea. Nebuchadnezzar was known himself as a lion, and there were eagles there, and both Ezekiel and Jeremiah talk about Babylon through eagles and through lions. I watched its wings were torn off. That's kind of a violent picture. You can imagine this amazing lion with wings on it, and the wings are torn off. And it's kind of a cool picture of exactly what happened to Nebuchadnezzar and how he was humbled. So that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and it had the mind of a human was given to him. And a lot of commentators think this is talking about when he was humbled and when he had compassion. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in his mouth. And the bear is talking about the Medo-Persian Empire. It's interesting how this works. And you can imagine this bear, it's ferocious, it's laying on its side in the sense that one side is passive, which happened to be the Medes, and one is active and takes over, which is the Persians. And they were going to have in his mouth three different things, and there were three kingdoms that the Medo-Persian Empire had taken over. One was Egypt, one was Lydia, and one was Babylon. It was raised up on one side, and there were three ribs in its mouth. It was told, and I want to make sure we capture this, it's the divine passive. It's a way of letting us know that God gave permission for these kingdoms to rule. It was told, get up and eat your flesh, and that's exactly what the Medo-Persians did, is they conquered, they had taken over more territory than any other nation or country, and if you go through chapter 8, we're going to get to see this particular empire in much more detail next week. After that, I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. So first you get this lion, and then it builds its way to the Medo-Persians, and then we get to see a leopard, and on its back had 4 wings. So there's this incredibly fast animal that is so fast it's unbelievable. And not only does it run fast, but it has wings to make it go even faster. And that talks about Alexander the Great. We're going to go to way more detail about this next week in chapter 8. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority. I want to make sure we catch this. See, each of these beasts were given permission by God. Each of these beasts, even though they were evil and they were conquering and taking over, and even though they were ruling people, that God wants us to know from every single step along the way that they were only given authority and they were only able to do what God permitted them to do. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening. We don't even know what it was. Daniel was so scared by this beast, he couldn't even think of anything that described it in the world of the natural flesh. Watch what happens here. It's terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth, and it crushed and devoured its victims. This is talking about the Roman Empire, and that's exactly what the Roman Empire did, is it crushed, it devoured, it conquered in ways that were so strong and so powerful. Nothing else had ever done anything like that. It was different from all the former beasts because it had 10 horns. We're going to talk about this in just a minute. While I was thinking about the horns, I can imagine Daniel going, okay, I'm taking in all of this, and it's so overwhelming to me, I can hardly handle it, and I'm starting to think about 10 horns, and then all of a sudden, there's this other horn. Does anybody, as you read chapter 7, feel like I did? When you're starting to read it, you go, there is no way I can understand this. This is just coming at me so fast, I can hardly even grasp it. Daniel felt the same way, by the way. Before me was another horn, a little one, which came among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. And it's talking about, and in history, we end up finding out, and what we're going to find out in the future is after the Rome gets dispersed, and there's going to come this little horn, and we'll talk about him in a few minutes. Most commentators think it happens to be the Antichrist, that's the way the Antichrist is going to take over. There's going to be 10 different rulers or powers that come, and they think it's going to come out of Europe if we take this part literally. Then as they come from these 10 different rulers, the Antichrist is going to take over 3, and then all the other ones are going to bow down. But that's next week. We're going to really talk about the Antichrist later. This is the horn, and the horn is always in the Old Testament a sign of power, a sign of authority. Had eyes, like the eyes of a human being, and I want you to pay attention to this because there's something here about the mouth. And not only the mouth, but the one that spoke boastfully. So he goes over it really quick, verses 1 through 8, just talk about there's 4. And I want to make sure before we go into it that we kind of see how it fits in chapter 2 and chapter 7. In chapter 2, remember there's the head of gold. And then in chapter 7, there's the lion with wings of an eagle that talk about Babylon. In chapter 2, there's the chest and the arms, that's silver, and these are precious metals, each a little bit less valuable, but more strong and able to devour and conquer bigger portions of the world. Then here in chapter 7, there's a bear that has 3 ribs in his teeth. That refers to Medo-Persia. Then there's the belly and the thigh in chapter 2, which is bronze. It's a little bit stronger metal, but less valuable. Here, it's the leopard with 4 wings, which happens to talk about Alexander the Great in Greece. Then we get the legs and feet of iron, and you remember the toes that were made of iron and bronze together. It's this ferocious beast with iron teeth. Remember chapter 2, that something happens at this time. Remember how the statue's there, Nebuchadnezzar has this massive dream, and all of a sudden something comes and it's not made by human hands, and it's this rock. And this rock comes and hits the statue and knocks it over and disintegrates it completely like chaff. Remember in chapter 2? Now we're going to see what takes place, which is the main point. We're going to slow down here and we're going to capture this, because if we're not careful, we'll get so fixated about all these kingdoms and who the Antichrist is that we'll miss the main point of what it's actually saying. As I looked, thrones. It's interesting, if Revelation, it talks about how when God had the courtroom at the time of the Battle of Armageddon, and when God decided to do something, he got on the throne. And when that takes place, there's other thrones surrounding God on his throne. We're set in place, and I love this because it's the Ancient of Days. Isn't that a cool descriptive way of talking about God? It's such a powerful metaphor to help you understand that something that is lasted throughout eternity. All of a sudden, there's this throne comes down, and the Ancient of Days is sitting on it. And it's a metaphor that the book of Revelation really builds, that God, who is sovereign in control, is about to hold court. And I love this courtroom scene because we get to see that all of these things are taking place, and God permitted them. And all of a sudden, God is going to come down in the midst of the chaos when everything seems to be completely out of control, and he is going to hold court. His clothing was white, and white is a sign of purity as snow, and his hair and his head were white like wool. And it's this sense of wisdom and purity together with God sitting on the throne. And his throne was flaming fire with wheels all ablaze. And if you read Ezekiel, it talks about this powerful blazing fire. Some people say it's like God in a wheelchair, but I don't think that's the image. It's God able to go everywhere to and fro and see everything at the same time, because he is eternally existed and he knows exactly what happened, and he can see all the way to the thoughts and intents and the motives of every single person's heart. Flaming fire is a sign of judgment, and here's this sense that God is on the throne, who is the eternal ruler that has control of everything, and he is pure and powerful and wise, and he sees all, and he's about to judge. A river of fire, and throughout the Old Testament, river is kind of this river that's flowing, and it talks about God's grace and mercy, but it's not a river of water. It's a river of fire, which has to do about judgment coming out of before him. Thousands upon thousands, and that's as high as the ancient world could count. 10,000 times 10,000, and there's this millions of people. And the book of Revelation picks up on this exact same theme and talks about all of the nations from every tribe and tongue and language are gathered in the throne room in heaven, and God is pictured around with countless number of saints around him. A river was flowing, coming out before him, thousand upon, and here's the crucial part. The court was seated, and the books were opened. We know that this takes place, according to the book of Revelation, at the great white throne judgment, where God says, enough is enough, and he holds people accountable. Watch what happens. Then I continue to watch, and here's Daniel going, I can't even handle this. This is coming at me so fast, and I am amazed, and it's just crazy. And he sees something else happening, and it's really powerful. This is the second time we get to see this. Then I continue to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. Remember, there's 10 horns, and then one horn gets so big, it's as if it goes all the way to heaven, and the characteristic that it focuses on its boastful boasting and the words that come out of his mouth. Revelation chapter 5 talks about a man of intrigue that is able to use persuasive words to convince the nations to follow him. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. And we're going to get to see the interpretation in a few minutes, so I don't want to ruin it till then. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. So the final beast comes up, and then God judges that beast and throws them somewhere. If you want to read about it, go to Revelation chapter 19, and you get to see how God judges in the Battle of Armageddon and takes the Antichrist once and for all and throws him into the eternal lake of fire. And it's interesting how, even though this was thousands of years before, it fits perfectly together with what we read in Revelation. In my vision at night, I looked, and it's the second time we see it at night, and this vision is so intense that Daniel's laying in bed, but he sees himself in the vision there walking up to try to understand this, which just is absolutely mind-boggling when you catch this. Here's Daniel in bed watching himself in the middle of the vision, which is kind of cool. And there before me, and this is the phrase that Jesus picked up on. If you read the New Testament, and you'll get to see what Jesus calls himself at least 70 times, his favorite title for himself is the Son of Man. And he gets it right out of this passage. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. And the clouds are always talking about, because that's where we see God coming from. See, all the other ones came in the midst of the chaos, out of the world of rebellion and chaos. But someone comes down, and God is already on the throne. The Ancient of Days is already on the throne, about to do something. And the Son of Man is coming in the clouds. And if you ever want to read some cool passages, you can go to Mark chapter 13, Matthew chapter 24. And in both of those, and Matthew chapter 24, Mark chapter 14, are also, you can read about this. Twice, Jesus is in very difficult circumstances. And remember when he is being tried and the Sanhedrin have got Jesus surrounded, and they're peppering with questions, and they're bringing up false accusation after false accusation. Then we get to see exactly what he said. Watch this. But Jesus remained silent to all of their accusations. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And here's what Jesus said so calmly. He said, "I am," Jesus said. "And by the way, you are going to see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, coming down from the clouds of heaven," quoting this passage from Daniel. In Mark chapter 13, it says, "At that time you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels to gather the elect of the four winds from the ends of the earth and the ends of the heaven." So here's this picture where God the Father, the Ancient of Days, is sitting on the throne. He's holding court, and the Son of Man is coming, the one who has authority and dominion. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. And now, remember I told you we're not going to get fixated on all of the unimportant details. We're going to slow down and catch the important. We're about to say it the first time. I love how Daniel slows down and gives us this main point 4 different times. Here's the first time. I have it in blue so you can see it. He, that's Jesus, was given authority, glory, sovereign power, and all nations of people of every language worshiped him. The book of Revelation talks about how there's the Father on the throne, and then there's the slain Lamb that is worshiped by all the nations. Here, it's the Son of Man coming down from the clouds. He has dominion, and his everlasting dominion will not pass away, and his kingdom is the one that will never be destroyed. So I want us to capture this, okay? There's going to be a bunch of kingdoms, and it's going to get worse and worse, and it's going to cause all kinds of chaos. But remember in chapter 2, here's this rock that's Jesus comes and takes them out from their feet. Here we get to see that the Son of Man is going to come down from the clouds of heaven, and he is going to intervene, and his dominion will last forever, and it will never be destroyed. I could get pretty excited, but I'm going to wait till later. Verse 15. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit. This is the second time we get to see Daniel stressed out. He is overwhelmed by this because he sees the evil that's going to take place. He sees about how things are going to get worse, and they're going to get worse, and they're going to get worse. But God is going to step into history and do something amazing. I approached one of those standing there. So Daniel sees himself in his vision, and he walks up, and I'm convinced it's Gabriel because in chapter 8, he goes back and says, in the earlier vision, Gabriel was the one that was there then, so we don't know it now, but Gabriel is there, and Daniel comes up to him. You know Gabriel better. Remember when Zechariah was there, and the angel comes up to him and announces the birth? That's the same Gabriel, the angel, the messenger of God. Now, he goes up to him and he says, okay, you got to help me. I don't understand this. I'm stressed out. This is really stressful. Could you help me understand what's going on? Don't you love the fact that Daniel gave us the interpretation right in the midst of it? Daniel was able to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, but God sent an angel to interpret it for him so that we could have some understanding of it. I approached the one who was standing there and asked him the meaning of this. So he told me, and he gave me this interpretation of these things. The great beasts are 4 kings. Okay, they are 4 kings. We kind of know from reading them before, it's Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome. Those are the 4 kings that will rise from the earth. But now he's going to introduce the second part of the main point. This is new information, and I want us to slow down and capture this, because if we don't catch it, we'll miss something really crucial and absolutely important. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever and ever. Now, we tend to miss this. But if you think about it, here's Daniel letting us know that God is not only in control of history, but in the history that he's control of, he is going to allow us to rule and reign throughout eternity. Just let that sink in. That God is going to protect his people, and he's going to entrust them with ruling and reigning throughout eternity. Then I wanted to know the meaning of the 4th beast. So Daniel gets the main point, and he says, okay, I got this. But he asked the kind of questions we would ask, like, when is this going to happen? Who is this character? Could you give me more information? Does anyone else ever want to know stuff like that? You're reading it going, but okay, that's the main point, but I want to know some other stuff. And this is what we tend to do, and we get fixated on it. We're going to go kind of quickly because I want to get somewhere. Then I wanted to know the meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, the most terrifying one with its iron teeth and bronze claws. We want to know about Rome, the beast that crushed and devoured, and that's exactly what Rome did to all of its victims, and it trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and this other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell down. I want to know about this imposing guy that speaks boastfully. Verse 21, as I watched, the horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating him. You see, after Rome is, by the way, when Jesus comes, we're going to get to see a great picture of that next week when he comes his first time. And then after he gets there, the kingdom's allowed to rule, and it's exactly how it worked in Western civilization. Rome didn't completely dismantle, and there's no kingdom that's taken over the entire world, but the ideas of Rome have really developed, and the ideas that have come about humanism and about how men can live on their own and how women can live on their own without God as their ruler. As I watched, the horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them until the Ancient of Days came. And this is the second time we get to see the same picture, but he's helping us understand it. And he pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High. This is the second time we get to capture this truth. And he came near until they possessed the kingdom. So just so you make sure you catch the main important point is Jesus' dominion will last forever, and that rule will go on, and he's going to turn over to us the ability to rule and reign throughout eternity. Verse 23, he gave me this explanation. The 4th beast is the 4th kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from the other ones, will devour the whole earth. And what makes it different than all the other ones is it's going to expand to the entire world, where it's going to be global. And for the first time in history, we get to see how one pandemic is now globally all around the world, which is kind of scary and interesting at the same time. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come, and we're going to focus a lot of energy on this next week, so I don't want to get bogged down on the insignificant, I want to capture the main point. After them, another king will rise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue the three kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress the holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. The Antichrist, when he comes, he's going to try to set different the way everything is working. If you want to do some history and you want to understand next week better, I would encourage you to read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and 1 John chapter 2. If you read those two, you're going to get to see about there's going to be many antichrists. And in 2 Thessalonians, it actually takes these phrase right here about lawlessness and says the man of lawlessness will come. And by the way, there's many antichrists, and he's going to talk about those different things. And he's going to try to change the set times and the laws, and they're going to try to turn things upside down. Have you noticed that morality, all of a sudden, what's right has become wrong, and what we think we're supposed to be the way, all of a sudden it's criticized and it's abnormal, and the way that relationships work and the family is working, and all of a sudden that's the wrong way to do it, how it's all going to get turned around. That's exactly what's taking place today. The Most High and oppress the holy people and try to change the set times and laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. And some of you are wanting to know exactly how long is that going to be. It's going to be a time, and half a time. A lot of people think it's 3.5 years. I'm not quite sure. I'll give it to you what I think next week. But the court will sit, and the power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people. This is the fourth time, just to make sure we capture this, okay? Don't miss this. There's going to be an awful time where the kingdoms are going to get worse, and they're going to get farther away from what God wants, and they're going to become more powerful, and they're going to devour, and they're going to turn their attention towards persecuting God's people. And it is going to be awful, and none of us are going to like it. But don't panic, because the Most High is in control, and he is going to ultimately protect his people. Over the holy people and the Most High, his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. And watch this. Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts. And not only was I troubled, but I became pale. He was overwhelmed with the sadness of the evil that would take place. And then I kept the matter to myself. It's interesting how we find out at the end of the book that God told him this would not be revealed. But in Revelation, it tells us that I want you to proclaim this to everyone because the end is becoming near, and everyone needs to understand this. The best way I can understand it is through one of my favorite sports. I absolutely love football. And my favorite team is the Broncos. In fact, I've been a Bronco fan since I was 4 years old. And my favorite season of the Broncos took place in 2011. And it's interesting because they were only 8-8 that year. My team has won 3 Super Bowls, so I have a little bit to celebrate. And there's been some great things take place, but that isn't what my favorite season was about. You see, my favorite season happened the year that we got Tim Tebow as our quarterback. Does anyone kind of remember that? He came along, and there was a big controversy, and the Broncos had Kyle Orton as their quarterback, and they went 1-3. And there was such an upswing of people that they finally decided to put Tebow in because they were getting crushed in that 5th game. He got in and almost brought them all the way back from a 21-point deficit in the 4th quarter, and he became the quarterback. And then he started in Miami, and he came back, and they only scored 10 points until the very end, and then they got a field goal, and then they won in overtime. And then they lost, and then they went through a stretch where they won 6 games in a row. 5 of those games, they came back at the very end, and they scored to tie it up, and 3 of those, they ended up winning it in overtime. And I remember being so happy thinking, God is going to do something so great. This is so cool. This is so awesome. And then they lost 3 games in a row and backed into the playoffs. And they had to play the best defense in the NFL, which happened to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the Pittsburgh Steelers dominated everyone on defense, and everyone said the Broncos have no chance. So we had a staff meeting and I couldn't watch the game, and all I kept hearing is that they were winning and they were up by 14 points in the second half. And things got crazy and we left and we didn't know the score, and we got home, and when we got home I turned it on and I started watching it. And I watched the lead dwindle, and Pittsburgh tied it and they got in overtime, and the suspense was so thick that my wife couldn't handle it anymore. So she went in the other room so she could find out what happened, and I completely forgot about that. We're watching it, it gets to overtime. When it gets to overtime, it is so stressful and so overwhelming. My wife and my daughter knew what had happened. They knew that in the first play in overtime, Denver won the game because Tim Tebow threw an 80-yard touchdown pass and they scored. So unbeknownst to me and to my son, they snuck in the other room and they took this video of us because they knew how much I cared about the Broncos and how much I loved Tim Tebow and how I would celebrate like crazy. So if you watch the screens, this is my daughter having the foresight to realize that her dad was about to humiliate himself.
Get in there! Get in there! Score! Yeah! Yes! Woo! Yeah!
Now, that guy was a little passionate, right? What I want us to capture for just a second is that when you know the end, you don't worry about all the details, right? When you know how things come to a conclusion, you're not stressed out about what's taking place. You see, chapter 7 of Daniel gives us some critical information that changes everything if we allow it to get into our souls. Because we know that ultimately we win and we get to permanently reign with God. And we know that his kingdom is eternal and he will entrust us with an incredible inheritance. That information changes everything. You see, knowing that God is controlling the outcomes changes the way we respond to our enemies' short-term victories and temporary advances. Some of you are paranoid to no end about what's going to happen in the election. And even if the wrong people get elected, it's just a short-term advance and temporary victory. If we know how the game ends, then we can respond with despair. We don't have to respond with despair and panic. Some of you are thinking, man, that guy was pretty excited, and that response to a football game was over the top. Did you know that my first day in God's kingdom will make that celebration look like I was unemotional and completely disinterested? If you think that was crazy, wait till we get to see what God has in store for us in eternity. I want to paint a picture of God's kingdom. Some of you might want to close your eyes. You don't have to. There's a day coming when everything will be like it should be. All of history is working towards God's plans with God's people, working towards God accomplishing his purposes. God will bring to fruition everything he's been working on all along. Relationships will be perfect. Broken relationships between God and human beings will no longer be disconnected and separated. We will reign as kings and priests in our resurrected bodies throughout eternity. In God's kingdom, when King Jesus comes down from the clouds, there will be no pain, no disappointment, no hunger, no frustration, no selfishness, no rejection, and no chemotherapy. Love will be in the air, forgiveness will be in the water, grace will be in the food. Sleep will come easily and last as long as necessary. You will be constantly smiling because your soul will be full of joy. You will have deep friendships with hilarious people that will make you laugh so deeply that you will constantly fall out of your chair. You will work in a job with people you get along with in an environment that is perfectly suited for your unique gifts and talents. And you will be able to accomplish things and get things done. You will know at the core of your being that you're deeply loved, valued, and appreciated. And every single day will get better because God is present and he will be accomplishing his purposes. And I want to say to let the message of Daniel get in your soul. You see, it seems like the world's out of control, and it seems like our circumstances are completely spiraling out of order. But one day, the God of the universe is in control of all of the circumstances, and he is going to sit on his court, and he is going to set everything right. And from that day forward throughout eternity, we are going to get to experience what we were made for, which is to rule and reign in his kingdom throughout eternity. And if you think a football game's worth getting excited for, wait till that day. I want us to consider that Daniel chapter 7 paints the picture of the way the world actually is, with one king in control through all eternity. Dear Heavenly Father, I love football. And I absolutely loved watching Tim Tebow bring them to that victory. But God, I can't wait to cheer for when the King of Kings and Lord of Lords comes out of the clouds and makes things right. God, I can't wait to exist in a world where everything has been made right and we get the longings of our heart fulfilled in our front of our very eyes. Thank you, God, for chapter 7. And thank you for letting us see what one day will be. In Jesus' precious and holy name, amen.